statement that you brought up, or the thesis of Henri Pirenne, about the way in which Arab culture moved through Europe and the devastating consequences, in a sense, for Southern Europe that forever lost its hegemony in the Mediterranean.
Southern Europe has never recovered. In fact, that is what's so interesting about the Pirenne thesis. He may not be completely right. No one is always completely right. But what's so fascinating is that he did pinpoint the reason, I think, for the decline of Southern European culture, hegemony, and dominance. Because before that, all we ever heard about Europe was Italian culture, Greek culture, Spanish culture, and anything north of the Alps was unheard of. And what he does is he shows that not only did the Arabs turn the Mediterranean into an Arab lake by the sea activity. And you know, an interesting sideline to that I've often pointed out to students that might interest your viewers is that if you look at European cities, none of them are on the seacoast. All the principal European cities are inland, up rivers. If you look at American cities, like New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New Orleans, they're all on the seacoast. We don't have any marauder raiders, pirates in the United States culture area. The Atlantic Ocean is too big. But in Europe, the Mediterranean, Rome is inland. The principal Spanish cities are inland. Absolutely. France, Paris is up the Seine. It wasn't just the Arab raiders in the south. You had the Viking raiders in the north. All London is inland. There are no European cities to speak of that are on the coast, none whatsoever. So this closing off of the Mediterranean, both through piratical activity and also the interesting point that you discover is that for a while commerce was even interrupted in the Alps, that you just didn't get the passage from north and south, and the center of European life, the axis switched to the north. This is his thesis, and this is what he thought Charlemagne represented, Charlemagne being a northern European king, a Franco-German king. And I think there's a lot of truth there. He does explain a lot, and of course, as you say, the South never recovered, and the North has been dominant since.
No, I mean, it's fascinating because as a professor of literature and thinking of my own studies in the Middle Ages and the Romance language Middle Ages, we constantly come across the menacing Arabic type, the Saracens and all the literature, but it's fascinating. It's the first time I've ever heard anything about why, and then an historical thesis for it. And
this is my thesis, of course.
I realize that, but it really puts the European world back into contact, I mean, through the things you've been talking about, back into contact with the Arabic world, which leads me to my next question is, why the blackout? I mean, why in European studies do we not broach this topic so much at the beginning?
That's a very interesting question. I wish some of your students had asked me that, because it's such a rich question in the sense that you do have a blackout. You know, a lot of people don't understand Dante's sweet new style. Dante's sweet new style is the Arab poetry of Spain of 2 centuries before. We have Ibn Hazm, who is writing about amore. Everything for him is amore.
Romance philologists don't say that, though.
And this moves from Spain. The whole chivalrous ethic, the chivalrous idea comes from Umayyad Spain, and on through the poetry into troubadour poetry of southern France, then on into Italy. So all of that flows from, I don't want to make too much of it, but all you have to do is read the Umayyad poets of southern Spain, and you know the Arab ethic of not touching women and so on. You have this admiration from afar. It is all the basis of the chivalric ethic, and you're first getting this amore, love poetry in, of all places, 1000s Cordoba, Spain. And the, of course, master of this is Ibn Hazm. Now, they don't do it in philosophy either. Philosophy and science, all you hear about is the scholastic synthesis. And a student is brought up to think that everything begins with Aquinas and so on. Aquinas is an interesting thinker, but I have to be frank. There is nothing original in Aquinas' work. It is all in Maimonides, and not just Maimonides, Avicenna, Averroes, and Alfarabi before him. In other words, it's been that kind of thinking has been going on for 300 or 400 years prior to that in a Arabo-Jewish environment, particularly an Arabic philosophical environment, starting in Baghdad with the cultural translations of the Arab manuscripts. You know, another interesting thing, just in taking Arabic civilization, and I sketch the history very, very fast, but these little anecdotes are illustrative. The Mamluks, it is really a word in Arabic, to be owned by the state, to be possessed by the states. The Mamluks stopped the Mongols in Palestine, which is why Arab civilization switched to Egypt. All of the Arab world on the other side of that, in Iraq and Syria, were devastated, and they never recovered. But the Mamluks were the group that stopped the Mongols in Palestine, a very famous battle in the 1260s, late 1250s. They were brought up on Platonic philosophy. It is quite likely that the whole Mamluk idea of a slave class that becomes the leader and the warriors is based on Plato's Republic. All this is part of the movement of Greek ideas into Arabic. It's very curious.
I'd like to go back to that earlier thesis about the earlier idea about European culture shifting north with the closing
off of the Mediterranean.
With the closing off of the Mediterranean. If I were a young fellow about to do a PhD in history, I would certainly like to look into this area, but I would like to bring a series of questions to it. And one is, does this shift jibe with the development of commercial agriculture and later the industrial and later the development of commerce? Does it jibe with Protestantism, with the schism between?
I'm sure all of it could be linked in. I mean, I haven't thought in those terms, but that's where your young researchers could move the parenthesis. And I don't know what young Belgian or European scholars have done with, after all, Perrin was a Belgian nationalist, and he wanted to show why, after all, Brussels is the center of the common market today, you know.
And I would particularly want to deal with this idea from the point of view of, is Europe rejecting the possibility of a multicultural Europe in the Mediterranean and moving in the direction of a type of cultural purity that then can be located in the north where there is?
I think at this time that happened, yes. I think at this time the Charlemagne ethic, you know, united Germanic and Franco groups. It was a Franco-German, that's what was called the Holy Roman Empire. I think Perrin is very good on the question of Charlemagne. You know, Charlemagne actually had physical contacts with the Caliph of Baghdad. There were deputations exchanged with Harun al-Rashid, the fabulous Caliph of Baghdad of the 800 period, about whom the Arabian Nights is written. There are deputations back and forth. They were both very much aware of themselves.